I have all of the background painted in black now, and I went ahead and sketched in some leaves and a stem. I've also measured off where I'm going to put my border, and just used a ruler and a chalk pencil to do that. I've come in about 1.25 inches from the edges to mark my border. Okay, I'm going to start by finishing up this back petal first, and all I've basically got left is to get some veins and then see if I need to touch up the edges at all. So let's zoom in. For the vein lines, I'm going to use the quinacridone violet, and I'm going to use my 20-aught script liner. I am going to thin the quinacridone violet with about 50% extender, just like you would for liner brush work. Instead of using water, I'm going to use extender to thin it. And the reason I'm using extender is because I want to be able to soften these lines and kind of get rid of the beginning and ending points. If you kind of think of the letter Y as you're putting these lines in, I am just adding lots of thin lines. I also did blow dry my entire piece with a hair dryer before I am working on this step now. I'm softening those little vein lines. Want to kind of push or melt them down into the petal a little bit more. I'll take on a little bit fuzzier look as opposed to sharp edges. Get some on the other side as well. And it's up to you how many of these you want to put on. I think it really helps if you actually take and look at a real picture of a orchid, kind of see some of the different characteristics that they have. There's so many variations of color. It really is kind of fun to try the different color combinations. So there again, just soften this down, and remember I had a little bit of extender still in my blender brush, but otherwise my petals are totally dry. So I think it's best when you get to this stage to go ahead and stop and blow it with a hair dryer. The other thing I usually do at this stage before I started this was I went and got myself some fresh water and started actually with a clean palette. Usually by this stage I want a little bit cleaner palette than what I had. Trying to use up old yucky paint while you're finishing the project is usually a mistake. Alright, and that's probably good enough for that. I can decide if I need to. I actually like that petal pretty much as is. The only thing I want to pump up is this little bit of white area, the highlight. So I'm going to clean my round brush off and load it with extender, blot it on the towel. I'm going to put a little drop of extender into my white color and make sure that my blender brush is clean. So I dipped it in extender and then blotted on the towel. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of punch up that white highlight a little bit and soften around the edges. Get that to pull up just a little more. And that I think is fine. while I've got the white on my brush, I also want to clean up this edge on the petal next to it. So I am going to put another coat on there. And soften that edge. And get it to just kind of melt in. I'm only adding the extender into the paint color. Come down along, and remember, this did not go all the way into the center of the flower. Stop when you run into that shadow area. Soften that inside edge. Let it kind of melt into the shadow. And I think I'll as long as I'm right here, I'm going to punch up the center highlights in those two areas of the petals before I get started with the veins. I want to get those to pop out just a little bit more yet. And just the outside edge. Wipe the excess off on my paper towel. I may have gotten just a little too wet on here. I'm just going to softly soak up a little of that excess. Okay. And let's punch up the white on the other side as well. And around the edges. You start getting into all the little refining stages now, and it does make a big difference. You know, a lot of times your flower looks kind of rough until you get to these last stages. You just have to kind of bear with it and let it take its course. All right. Okay, and let's get just a little more in this center here as well. I think I will switch to my smaller blender though. And this is the small Dirty Dancer. Still kind of doing the little Y shapes. Now when I put these on, I don't want to get too many done because I want to be able to blend these while they're still wet. So only do a few of them and then soften. Otherwise they'll dry and then you'll have real harsh lines. So that's probably about enough, and then I'll take my blender brush and see how I'm just kind of catching like the outside edges or the top tips. Make sure that those kind of melt in. I don't want to totally lose all my white, but if I do, I still can come back and clean that white up. But I would want to make sure that those vein lines are pretty dry before I do that. Constantly wiping my blender brush on my paper towel, and get the opposite end here too. You want some that are brighter than others, some you want to just kind of melt in. Okay, and then I'll get some more. I don't want to go into my white highlight with these vein lines on this towards the center of the petal there. Make sure you stay a little ways away from that. There again, just lines that kind of break off from each other. They really are very bright. On the flower that I was using as a reference, the vein lines were very pronounced. And just soften. just a light touch. And I think I'll turn this around so that I can kind of reach those veins just a little better, so I can kind of blot down where I stopped. Just a little extra extender on my brush to help those kind of melt into that white. Sometimes it's kind of hard to know when to quit with all of these. I think they're actually kind of fun to put on. And then I don't know if you noticed, but there again, the vein lines, just like I told you about the streaks when we first put those in, everything points towards the center of the flower. It's important to get the direction right. Just soften down those tips, both the beginning and the end. I could even add a little bit more color in there if I felt like I wanted my flower to be just a little bit brighter. I could add like a thin amount of some streaks of the quinacridone with my round brush, and then just kind of soften those in. You can decide how bright you want it. Okay, the little petal down in the bottom, that didn't have veins that went all the way to the outside edge. They stayed a little bit more towards the inside, or towards the center of the flower area. So sneak a few of those in, and there again, want to soften that down. And same on the other side, and not as many on there. Everything you're eyeballing towards the center of the flower, so if you visually pull the angle of these from the center of your flower, you'll be good. And just a couple more on here. Okay, and then let's go to the big petal. And I just seem to find that it's easier to pull towards me, so I'm going to turn this sideways. I want to be careful now in the center area here. I want those to be a little bit more muted. I don't want them to be as bright, but I have a couple ways of doing that. I can put them in and then come back with kind of a little wet blend of some white and colors in there to kind of push them down in a little better. But I want to try not to get quite so many in there to begin with, so I don't have to undo as much. Get rid of those points on both ends. I really do have a lot of extender in this color, kind of making it a little bit more transparent than it already is. And just keep filling out and soften down in, especially the beginning and endings. Okay, getting closer. Just don't try to do the whole petal and think you're going to be able to go back and blend them, because you've got to get them while they're still wet. But you can see how that melts right down in. Now if I was trying to do this with just water, I'd be having a hard time. And I'll purposely get a couple of them a little too strong here so that I can show you how to camouflage those afterwards. I won't worry that I got them too strong. So I can set those down in with a little bit of white afterwards. Let's get a little bit more at the bottom here too. Now every time you paint this, it's probably going to come out just a little bit different. Just depends on how carried away you get with each of the different colors. It can totally change the look of the flower. Even though I'm working a little bit quickly here, I'm still using a very, very, very light touch. I am not pushing down or stippling, and I'm always kind of holding my brush at like a 45-degree angle so that I can have a little softer touch as I'm working. Alright, let's take a look at this. Okay, actually, I was going to try and make some a little bolder than they should be, but I actually kind of like what I've got going here, so I think I might leave it, but I'll just show you. Okay, let's clean the brush. Let's say I had a few of them a little too strong. I'd clean my brush, I'd reload it with extender, pick up a little bit of white, maybe put some definitely put some extender in the white. Okay, and then go ahead and get some white streaks back in, and then just kind of carefully aim for the tips. I know you always want to go directly in the center, but really try to just get the tips or the beginning and ending points of your strokes and get those to kind of soften and blend in. So, and I could do this with my flesh tone color also. If I needed to add some more of that, I certainly could. Okay, now I had said that I put that little white edge on the petal, but I actually do want some yellow on there now, so make sure that my script brush is clean. I'm going to take extender and thin the Indian yellow. I'm going to try that color first, see if I like that. Half and half, just about, just like you would for regular liner brush work. It's just I'm using extender instead of water. And I'm going to put that along the edge, and then I'll use my smaller blender brush to kind of catch that edge that's inside the petal itself. And I do want to get a little bit brighter highlight on that same petal in the pink area. So I think that the white all by itself might be too bright. I've got a little bit of pink in here, although it's hard to tell. Get it right in the middle of that pink and kind of soften it down. Brighten that up a little, and I want to make sure that this little kind of goofy petal down here has maybe a little bit brighter edge on it so it stands out. Okay, and then I need a little bit brighter on this side, so let's go back. In fact, I'll just use my round brush to put just a little bit of the yellow on that white edge. Now if you get too carried away with the yellow, if it's too bright for you, you could come back, put a little bit of the red over it, soften it up a bit. Okay, now the bottom edge here, I want that to stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to actually use Naphthol Red Light. That's a little bit more of an orangey red. And there again, add some extender in there. It's kind of hard to tell the difference between that and Naphthol. There's just a slight difference, but it'll be just enough to kind of brighten that edge up a little bit. Lay that down and then soften that inside edge. In fact, you could use this in any of the areas that you may feel you want to punch the color up a little bit. Maybe I'll stick a little bit in the middle here and then just blend around so that I don't see any harsh edges. Maybe a little bit coming down and around the flower there. If you got too dark somewhere, this would be a good color to kind of blend in to soften things a bit. Oh, there's one thing I'm noticing. This petal here, if I visually pull this line up, I should have just the teeniest little corner of that petal that would show in that shadow area. So I'm going to take a little bit of the flesh tone and I'm going to put that in because I want that to look like it's the petal, and I think I can just get by with just base coating it in. So do you see how if you follow that edge it would curve up, and then it's curving up into this other area here. The leaves are just an impression in the background. I really didn't want them to stand out, so I'm trying to be a little bit careful, not letting them get too carried away. I'm not doing a lot of detail on them. I'm going to use the color Pine Green and put that out on the palette. Now I'm going to moisten again with the extender just so that I have a little bit more time to play. But be careful, you can't do the whole thing because you'll lose your chalk line, so just work on one leaf. I'm not coming all the way to the flower, it's just kind of got a little top corner there. And then soften that into the black. I do have a dirty brush though, so I'm going to clean my blender brush good. I forgot to do that, still had white on it. Redress it with extender. And then rub it on the towel. That's better. Okay, then I'm going to create like a center vein area and pull that color over. Not going to go all the way to the flower again. Okay, and then come across to the other side. Kind of define that outside edge. Now if you do get too carried away, you can always come back with black closer to the flower again for shading. But I just want to keep this very subtle. I'm going to keep the most amount of color at the outside or top tip. And these leaves are actually, they're not pointed tips, they're rounded tips on the ends. Okay. So I'm not coming all the way to the petal. Okay, I will come through the center here. And then soften. If you don't leave enough black showing on one side of the center vein, you can always come back and put some black. But I'm trying to do it a little bit more in one step, just to make it go a little faster. There's always more than one way of doing anything. I could also be corner loading. I just like using this brush to get the job done. Now this one I can see I've got a little too much moisture. I'm going to blot that. Okay, let's get the top edge. Kind of fill it in the corner there. Come down the center vein. Just a little bit on the other outside edge. I don't want it to be too dominant. And you're going to see that as this dries, this green right now looks pretty bright, but as it dries, it kind of disappears into that black. You're seeing the shine from it being wet from the extender, so it stands out a little bit more right now, but it will kind of melt in a little bit. You might have to go back and do just a little bit more on some of them then. Alright, let's get down in the corner here. I've got another one. Let's moisten it first. And of course, when I start getting towards the end, I start getting carried away with my extender, so I've got to blot a little bit more. Okay, let's get the edge. This time I can go till I touch the border. And then create a center vein. Not trying to fill it all in solid. I want to use that black to my advantage for my shadowy area. But you can see how quickly this goes on. I'm going to skip over the stem because I've got a leaf going behind it. Get the outside edge. And the outside edge on the other side. And then I want it to just kind of disappear because it's going behind the stem, so I don't want it to have too much importance. Okay, let's go back up to the top here. And you don't have to worry about staying inside the lines with the extender either, because it will dry clear. So that's another good benefit. Get the edges. Make sure I get through the center vein. Top tip. Taper it. And blend where I left off. Wiping my blender brush on my paper towel in between so that I'm not picking up all the color. Got 2 more leaves left. Now I just used a chalk pencil to sketch my leaves in, and so that does kind of disappear when the extender hits it and makes it wet. So if you're using a white graphite paper to transfer, it usually is pretty good and stays for you. A little bit more on the other side, but you see how I'm kind of leaving some area between the two, so that it kind of looks like there's a little bit of a center vein going through. Just moisten the last little leaf. Blot just a bit. And let's get the top edge, center vein, add a little extra in that top area. And a little bit on the other edge. We're almost there. Oh, I actually picked up a little bit of another color in my brush, so this is where you don't panic. That's one of the nice things about using the extender. Just take a little bit of a wet paper towel, wipe it off, and try it again. I'm going to take my dirty brush and I'm going to add just the teeniest bit of flesh tone into it. Don't want to get too carried away. And let's say like this leaf up here, get a little bit on that top tip. A little more paint on the brush would help. Try this again. You want to lighten it just enough to be able to see it a little bit. So just kind of that top tip, don't come down too far. And then blend that in. And just pick a few edges that look like maybe they would be coming forward more than the other parts of the leaves. We want some leaves to look a little bit more to the front, some to the back. So not every leaf is going to have this on. A little bit on this edge. Soften that in. A little bit on the center vein of that one too, I think. But if I get too bright, I can always put a wash of black over it too and tone it down, try it again. Okay, I'm not going to do the very back one. Let's maybe get a little bit on the edge of this one. And maybe a little bit on the top edge here. And just blend that down in.